Welcome to the Workplace Safety Show. I'm Mike Villa, I'm president of Llewellyn, and with me today is Jason Reason, who manages our combustible dust business. So Jason, in the last show you had with Jay, the topic was dangers of combustible dust and really trying to focus in on some of the misperceptions, particularly around housekeeping and house cleaning. So I think we answered that question. Today, based on a lot of the questions we've gotten in from our viewers, we want to focus in on OSHA. OSHA is a bit of an enigma to a lot of people in combustible dust in terms of what they're focused on. So maybe, and obviously you have a background with OSHA. You spent 13 years working for them. You've also trained quite a few of the compliance officers around the country. So I think it would really be helpful for our viewers if you would share your perspective on OSHA. What are they focused on when they come in and inspect? What are they looking at? So maybe we start with the first one with OSHA, which is really without a general standard out there. What are they focusing on?
Yeah, and like you said, Mike, right now OSHA doesn't have a specific standard for combustible dust. So they typically will focus on things they do have standards for and the other safety and health regulations they have. They use a lot of the general duty clause for situations where they don't have anything in terms of that would address the hazards associated with combustible dust, like, for example, lack of exposure protection on a dust collector. But the things they typically focus on most of their compliance inspections related to combustible dust would be things like housekeeping, electrical, in terms of not having the right type of electrical for combustible dust, sources of ignition related to forklifts and powered equipment like that, and hot work. And as well as they focus a lot of their attention on dust collectors and process equipment to make sure it's actually protected correctly.
Okay. So specifically, what do they look for, and which standards? How do they apply when they come out and do an inspection? Walk through for our viewers exactly what they do.
On any OSHA inspection, that basically the first two things they're going to look at are the hazard communication or HAZCOM program, and they're going to look at lockout tagout. They look at those regardless of what they're there to look at. That's actually a requirement. So that partially explains why the number one cited standard in terms of OSHA for combustible dust is HAZCOM, which relates to not having a program, not having safety data sheets, not doing effective training on the hazards associated with combustible dust, and labeling of combustible dust. After HAZCOM or hazard communication, the next most frequently cited standard is actually the housekeeping standard, which is under 1910.22, which now there's some discussion on what limit and what level they would actually cite housekeeping on, and it kind of varies depending on where you're going in terms of which OSHA office. But generally it's 1/32 of an inch. Anything above that in a dust layer thickness will be a citation for housekeeping.
Okay. Anything else that you can think of on OSHA when they come out?
There's two other big ones that they tend to look at, and one of them is personal protective equipment, or PPE, which is related to flame-resistant clothing. Now, a lot of times when I say flame-resistant clothing or FRC, a lot of people think that I mean 70E, NFPA 70E, flame-resistant clothing, but this is totally different. This is actually clothing that is designed to protect you not from an arc flash, but from a flash fire caused by combustible dust. So an industry that wears that kind of clothing, which is called NFPA 2112 clothing, would be the oil and gas industry. They wear that. And actually, OSHA will issue citations for that under 1910.132A, which is the general PPE standard. And then, as I said before, they'll look at electrical as well, and that'll be cited under OSHA's electrical standards.
Okay, good. What's the biggest change in terms of OSHA's perspective today versus a couple of years ago?
The biggest change probably is in 2008, OSHA redid the National Emphasis Program, or the NEP, which now requires every area office in terms of federal OSHA and every state plan state to now do 4 combustible dust inspections per year. So if there's 3 offices in a state, then that's going to be 12 inspections they have to do every year. And currently, combustible dust is listed in OSHA's top 3 priorities in terms of things they're looking at getting standards for and in terms of enforcement. along with silica and the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, I2P2. So they've really ramped up their enforcement of this. Now, that hasn't really stopped the accidents. They're still occurring. But they've really ramped up their enforcement, and that's probably the biggest change. Even without a standard, they're really ramping up enforcement of this. They generally average somewhere around 2,000 citations a year just on combustible dust.
Wow, that many. So it's safe to say that you expect those we expect those trends to really continue over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and if we have another imperial sugar, let's hope we don't, but if we do, I think it'll even get worse. So the enforcement will actually go up more. So
unfortunately, when we have catastrophes, that happens with regulations.
Yeah, OSHA tends to be reactive, not proactive on several things. So
sure. Anything else you want to add as we think about from an OSHA perspective again that really would help our viewers?
It's, with training all the compliance officers I've trained and doing the job for 13 years, it's hard to tell you what one compliance officer will look at versus another. It's all kind of different. But the one thing I can say is they are developing a standard. It keeps moving between when it's going to get done, when it's not. I think now it's moved back a little bit more because of silica. That standard is going to be based off NFPA standards, along with some other things OSHA may throw in there. Now, what standards it may be based off of, the ones I would look at in particular would be NFPA 654 and NFPA 652. Those are the two that OSHA seems to look at a lot. So, and they do use the general duty clause when they don't have a standard for something, and that's the one thing I would add is that it's tough to predict when they're going to issue general duty clause citations. But the number one cited thing for a general duty clause citation is having a dust collector indoors with no exposure protection, like a deflagration vent or suppression system.
The general duty clause is the hammer that's out there that it gives OSHA a lot of flexibility for citations. And
it does. When I did combustible dust for OSHA, I cited over 100 of them in about 3 years, just on combustible dust. In my career, I've cited over 500 of them, but just on dust, I've cited over 100.
Yeah, well, that certainly defines the magnitude of the issue that's out there that is going to increase. So with that, we appreciate you sharing your perspective on OSHA, and hopefully that helps our viewers. So thank you for joining us again today. Feel free to go to llewellyn.com to see other safety show videos. And this will be one of many, we're going to have a series on combustible dust, so you'll see quite a few more videos and safety shows going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.